Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat. Resolves.
Right.
Now, before you attack
Does
me-
anyone have an answer?
Well played.
Good game.
Hello, I'm DJ. This is the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. We have new Ravnica Allegiance spoilers, and I'm so excited to talk about Prime Speaker Vannifar. Prime Speaker Vannifar is 2 green-blue for a 2/4 legendary Elf Ooze Wizard. Tap, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Prime Speaker Vannifar lets you trade up your creatures into the next converted mana cost. This deck is going to be full of creatures getting us value, and then we're just going to throw them away to the graveyard and get the next best creature. Vannifar doesn't require any mana to activate this ability, so if we can untap her, that means we can get more than 1 activation per turn. That sounds real good. Also, we get an advantage if we can steal our opponent's creatures, because that's a free body to sacrifice and get something else relevant out of our deck. There are also benefits to copying and cloning creatures, because the copy has the converted mana cost of whatever creature it copies. So we could spend 2, 3, or 4 mana copying our opponent's gigantic creature, and if we like the gigantic creature, we can keep it around. But if we want one of our own creatures out of our own deck, we can sacrifice it for great value to Prime Speaker Vannifar and get something of 1 higher converted mana cost. With all of this tutoring and copying and stealing and everything, it feels like this is going to be a very cool toolbox general. We could just fill our deck full of any answer that we could need, always have access to card draw, always have some removal. Sounds like it could be pretty fun. But of course, if we have a commander that can get exactly what we need, we might just get a few combo pieces to finish out a game. This deck is filled with so many awesome creatures, value interactions, synergies, combos, that you can't play them all in a single commander deck. You're gonna have to make some cuts. But more importantly, this video can give you some angles to customize your specific deck. Take a particular package out of here and play with that. Don't feel like you have to play with every single card or every single combo. The first thing we're going to do is evaluate that activated ability. And I call it Birthing Pod because it is literally Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod is 3 in a Phyrexian, and it actually costs mana to activate Birthing Pod. 1 in a Phyrexian green. But again, it does the same thing as Vannifar. Sacrifice a creature, get 1 CMC higher out of your deck straight onto the battlefield. Yeah, it's pretty good. So good it was banned in Modern, and it is 100% in this deck. I mean, why wouldn't we have a second copy of our commander in our deck? It's just going to be so good. It can be very powerful to activate Vannifar more than once in a single turn, and I'm going to be talking about that quite a few times through this deck tech. Birthing Pod just allows you to do that anyways, because Birthing Pod is essentially a second activation, and so it plays well with everything in this deck. By the way, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to call activating Prime Speaker Vannifar's ability as podding, named after Birthing Pod. So what that means is you sacrifice a creature, you go search 1 for 1 converted mana cost higher and put it onto the battlefield. So I'm going to call that podding. All right, let's get into the details of Prime Speaker Vannifar. We're going to try to have as many synergies that work with Vannifar as possible. Thornbite Staff is an equipment, and it gives the creature, whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, untap this creature. So, by the way, Prime Speaker Vannifar taps and then sends a creature to the graveyard. Then Thornbite Staff will untap Vannifar again. This will let you pod over and over and over and over again, and this could basically get almost every creature out of your deck until your pod gets interrupted. Intruder Alarm also goes infinite because whenever any creature comes into play, untap all creatures. Prime Speaker Vannifar puts creatures into play, and that'll trigger the Intruder Alarm and untap Prime Speaker Vannifar so you can keep podding. If equipped, Illusionist Bracers will let you pod twice for a single activation. That's pretty cool. Retreat to Coralhelm uses your land drops as an untap effect. 1000-Year Elixir will give Prime Speaker Vannifar haste. I love that. And then will also untap target creature. So this is just a strong inclusion. Being able to get online with podding really quickly is going to be important. So anything that gives haste is going to be really valuable. Let's keep talking about haste, lightning greaves, and swiftfoot boots. Clearly, protecting your commander and giving her haste is going to be really, really valuable. So these are going to be solid inclusions. But also Concordant Crossroads. All creatures have haste. Yeah, it's so cheap, coming down at just a green, but it gives every creature haste. So this is often used in the very last moment. You drop it, suddenly your whole team has haste, and now you can attack for the win. Same thing goes with Hall the Bandit Lord. It's mana that can hastify your commander. And then Surrak the Hunt Caller is one of the only creatures in green and blue that can give another creature haste. It doesn't quite line up perfectly with Prime Speaker Vannifar because Formidable requires 8 power and just Surrak and Vannifar only give you 7. Ugh. No matter though, any mana dork can unlock this Formidable mechanic, or Surrak can come down way later in the game and give something much more important haste. Let's talk about two of the most important untappers in the deck, Wirewood Lodge and Minamo School at Water's Edge. The reason why they're so important is because they're free inclusions, they're lands. Wirewood Lodge untaps target elf? Yeah, Vannifar's an elf. Yes. Minamo School at Water's Edge untaps target legendary permanent? Yes! There are also plenty of different cards that synergize with these lands later on in the deck, so pay attention to them, remember them, don't worry, I won't let you forget them. These lands might be so good we end up running cards like Crop Rotation or Purr's Whim. Let's talk about a few more untapping powerhouses. Staff of Domination is just asking to go infinite. It's so good, and it can easily untap your commander to let you get multiple activations. Freed from the Real and Penman's Aura are enchantments that can go on your commander to untap them, so you can simply pay a single blue to get your activations in. And then Mind Over Matter and Paradox Engine, yeah, those are powerhouse cards for sure, giving you tons of ways to untap and really just close out the game. Next, we have some of my favorite untappers because they're on creatures, which means we can tutor them up. Kiora's Follower, Vizier of Tumbling Sands, and Fate Stitcher, my favorite. So here's what makes these so good. They can untap your commander to give you more pod activations. Beautiful, exactly what we want. They're creatures, which means that we can pull them out of our deck and start using them. Beautiful, okay? But also, they are ramp because all of these can untap lands. There are also other synergies involved in this deck, so these are just beautiful, wonderful cards. And Fate Stitcher specifically, because you can pod Fate Stitcher away into a 5-drop, and then you can unearth Fate Stitcher, untap Vannifar, and then pod it away again for another 5-drop. Oh my gosh, Fate Stitcher. There are a few more untappers I want to talk about. They're a little bit more narrow. Argothian Elder, Krosan Restorer, Magus of the Candelabra. These only untap lands. That could give us some really strong ramp in this game, but remember, we also have some lands like Wirewood Lodge and Minamo School at Water's Edge that would work with untapping our commander, so it's something to keep in mind. Also, Kiora, Master of the Depths. It can untap a target creature and a land. Yeah, that sounds pretty broken if you can get multiple activations out of Kiora, but she's not a creature, so I think I'm going to pass. So hopefully I've described to you a scenario where you can imagine podding with your commander 2 or 3 different times in a single turn. I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different creatures in the next section, and actually I'm going to be talking about them by converted mana cost. So I'm going to talk about all the 1s and the 2s and 3s and 4s and so on and so forth. But before I do, I want to mention some more value. If we play cards like Bramble Sovereign or Panharmonicon, then that means that every single time we get a new creature, bam, we can get another copy of it with Bramble Sovereign, or get another trigger of their ETB with Panharmonicon. These can be very, very good, and I particularly like the Bramble Sovereign because it's a creature. It means that you can pod into it. But also, the creature token it creates, well, that can be podded away into a 1-drop, sort of restarting the chain if you need new relevant creatures. So let's go ahead and start at the 1-drop. Well, how do we pod for 1-drops? I mean, what are we sacrificing? Well, we can sacrifice something like a Dryad Arbor, or a token like that Bramble Sovereign token, or a token that another creature creates. Or we animate a different land and sacrifice that. There's tons of different ways to sort of start the chain going. And 1CMC has some truly relevant abilities. Curian Ranger and Wirewood Symbiote. Curian Ranger says return a force you control to its owner's hand, untap target creature. that untaps your general. And it's just at 1 mana and the cost of mana ramp, which is a real cost, by the way. Wirewood Symbiote does something similar, return an elf you control to untap target creature. Oh yeah, you could build your deck with a critical mass of elves to make sure that you can always activate Wirewood Symbiote. So both of these have the potential to untap your commander and start going up the chain again to 2 CMC. But before we go there, there's a few more 1-drops that could be good utility. Sylvan Safekeeper has you sacrifice a land to give target creature Shroud. You really want to protect your commander, and so being able to do that could be very valuable. Also, don't forget about Mana Dorks and also that Magus of the Candelabra. Alright, let's get on to the 2 CMC creatures. And guess what? You can untap your commander at 2 CMC as well. Scrib Ranger. It's exactly like that Curian Ranger. Return a forest, untap a creature. Now your commander's untapped and you can go on to 3 CMC. Or if you have those really important lands on the battlefield, Cloud of Fairies will let you untap them so that they can untap your commander. Cloud of Fairies lets your commander ramp you as well. You can float some mana and then pod a 1-drop into Cloud of Fairies, and Cloud of Fairies adds 2 more mana to your mana pool. There are also some great bodies at the 2 CMC slot. Elvish Visionary, Coiling Oracle, and Wall of Blossoms all draw you a card. Remember, imagine Bramble Sovereigns and Panharmonicons, or just casting one of these in the late game, drawing a card, and then suddenly potting it away into a 3-drop. That is so much value. But the 2-drops get even better. Gilded Drake. This lets you steal your opponent's creature. Suddenly, you could have the best creature on the battlefield. That's nice to have. Or you could just get the biggest creature and then pot it away into something you really want out of your own deck. Phantasmal Image can similarly copy the largest creature on the battlefield, or it can copy some of those other creatures that have untap effects on them. And then our final clone effect is one rarely seen but is particularly good in this deck. Renegade Doppelganger. 1 and a blue for a 0/1 shapeshifter. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Renegade Doppelganger become a copy of that creature until end of turn. The reason why people don't like this clone is because it doesn't get enter the battlefield triggers. It's already on the battlefield, it just then becomes a copy of whatever that creature is. Don't misunderstand me though, Renegade Doppelganger is very good in this deck. It can become a utility creature like those untappers, and because it's been on the battlefield, immediately untap your commander. It can also just become a huge beater and swing in at your opponent. Also imagine this, you pod into a 6-drop, then you have Renegade Doppelganger become that same 6-drop. Now you can pod away the Doppelganger into your next 7-drop rather than getting rid of the 6-drop that you just got onto the battlefield. Next, we have a few win conditions at 2. We have Mindshrieker and Thrasios Triton Hero. If you have infinite mana, Mindshrieker will mill your opponents out and give you a gigantic Spirit Bird. Thrasios with infinite mana will get you every land onto the battlefield and almost your entire deck into your hand. That's a pretty good thing to have with infinite mana. There are also some cards in this list that will combo with Melira Sylvic Outcast, and I'll mention those along the way. Alright, next up is 3 converted mana cost. What are we gonna pod our Elvish Visionary into? Well, a Bounding Krasis, a Pestromite, a Deceiver, Exarch, all of these untap our commander and let us go straight up to the 4-drop slot. But there's some value in 3 CMC too, particularly Ramp. I love the value that comes with Farhaven Elf, Wood Elves, Yavimaya Dryad. They put a land onto the battlefield, developing your mana so that you can actually cast stuff along with podding it away, pretty important. And then also if you have a retreat to Coralhelm, you can pod into one of these elves and then the land will untap your commander. There's a few other 3-drop creatures that really work well with tapping and untapping. Sylvala Heart of the Wilds is one that I have in mind. It produces so much mana, and cards like Wirewood Lodge and Minamo School at Water's Edge also combo with Sylvala, and so we might be able to just produce a crazy amount of mana accidentally in this deck, because we have so many different ways to untap creatures. Same thing goes with Isan the Wandering Bard. This is a powerful competitive EDH deck. It is built with so much tuning and so much beauty, and you can read this card, it's not as good as the new Simic Commander. You have to pay 2 and a green, and you always start at 1 and work your way up. I don't know everyone, maybe Prime Speaker Vannifar is going to have a bunch more CEDH friends. More 3-drops. I talked about the power of clones. Mirror Image is a clone at 3 CMC, usually they're at like 4 CMC, and it can copy any creature you control. But that's okay, some of these creatures are so specific to your deck, only you want them. Let's talk about value. Let's get those Panharmonicon triggers with Champion of Wits and Eternal Witness. Now let's talk a little bit more about Toolbox. I want to talk about Spellseeker. Spellseeker is an amazing card letting you search out an instant or sorcery of 2 CMC or less. That is literally every card I want. Brainstorm in this deck is like an Ancestral Recall, because you can put cards you don't want back on top of your library and your commander shuffles them away, so you really do get 3 brand new cards. Also, what happens if you end up with that huge creature in your hand instead of in your deck? Because you can't pod that creature onto the battlefield if it's stranded in there. So Brainstorm lets you put it back on top of your library so you can activate Vannifar and get it onto the battlefield. Pay attention to Brainstorm effects when you have a shuffle on your commander. They're really, really good. Okay, Cyclonic Rift is just good. I don't have to talk about that. Sylvan Scrying. This gets you the lands you need. Very strong. Green Sun Zenith. We are playing Dryad Arbor because it lets us pod into our 1-drops, but that also lets Green Sun Zenith be a single green to mana ramp us. That's pretty good. But also Green Sun Zenith gets so many really relevant creatures. Next is Heroic Intervention, which is another level of protection, which is something we really like in this deck. And Benefactor's Drought is just kind of a fun card. It untaps all the creatures. That's what you want, right? Untap creatures. It also lets you draw a card, and whenever a creature an opponent controls blocks draw a card. I mean, there are scenarios where this card could theoretically draw you a bunch of cards, so maybe. Let's go with maybe. Another aspect of the toolbox has to be Trophy Mage. Trophy Mage lets you search for an artifact with converted mana cost 3 and put it into your hand. Now you might think that's pretty limiting, but let's look at them. Mirages Mirror. This is another copy effect. You can copy anything and pod it away. You can copy irrelevant land. Honestly, I've just been impressed with this card in most of my decks anyways, and in this deck it's even better, so yes please Mirages Mirror. Also Vidalcan Shackles. We talked about the power of stealing your opponent's stuff so you can pot it away. Vidalcan Shackles lets you do that every single turn. Oh, I'll take that, yes please. Pot it away into something I like. Oh my gosh, yes. I already mentioned Thousand Year Elixir, the power of haste and untapping, and Staff of Domination just seems to win the game as soon as you get it on the battlefield, so why not search it up? And finally, a few more 3-drops that go with the toolbox theme. Wanvuli Beast Tracker is interesting. It lets you tutor for a card with Death Touch, Hexproof, Reach, or Trample. Fierce Empath mainly gets you exactly what you want, which are big, fatty, fats. It gets a creature with CMC 6 or greater and puts it into your hand. All right, now let's talk about those 4 CMC creatures. Let's start off with the one that untaps your commander, Breaching Hippocamp. That's right, straight onto the battlefield, untap your commander, pot it away into a 5-drop. There are other great 4s. Faerie Artisans, remember we have Panharmonicons and great cards in this deck, and so Faerie Artisans will give us a brand new token every single turn. This is another card that I've just been impressed with overall. Also, it's constantly creating tokens, so we're always going to be able to pod those away into 1-drops. Soar of Temptation is another steal effect. I mentioned that being so powerful. You steal something good, pod it away, then pod the Soar of Temptation away a little bit later. Phyrexian Metamorph, again, a clone. Those are powerful as well. Moving on to other value 4-drops, we have Solemn Simulacrum. Just value, ramp ya, draw a card, throw it away for something bigger. Whirler Rogue, you might want to go with a little bit of a go-wide strategy here. Whirler Rogue can give you a few dudes, make something unblockable. And Glenelendra Archmage, this is something that you can pot away twice because it has Persist. And remember I mentioned that Malera Sylvic Outcast? Well, that's going to make sure that the -1/-1 counter can't go on Glenelendra, so you can just keep sacrificing this over and over and over again. There's a lot of infinite combos that deal with Persist. On to the 5-drops! So far, at every CMC, we have had a creature that can untap your commander with ease. Now we run across something that doesn't quite do it. Peregrine Drake can only untap your commander if you have Wirewood Lodge or Manamo School at Water's Edge on the battlefield. This does ramp you 5 extra mana though, so it's still a powerful deck and a really strong inclusion. The same thing goes with Body Double. This can untap your commander, becoming a copy of the Breaching Hippocamp you just threw into the graveyard. Oh, but then you end up with another 4-drop, not a 5-drop to go up to 6, because Body Double copies the CMC of whatever creature it copies. Could just pull an amazing creature out of your opponent's graveyard or something like that, so, I mean, still, it's a really strong card. But then there's tons of other value you can pot into at 5. Let's talk about Muldrifter, Acidic Slime, Thragtusk. When Thragtusk goes away, it leaves behind a beast that you can pod into a 1-drop. The value! Okay, but we're going to jump up to the 6-drop slot where we have more creatures that can untap your commander. That seems to be a theme here. Great Oak Guardian untaps all your creatures and gives them +2/+2. Woodland Bellower can get so many value creatures in this deck, but it always has access to Bounding Krasis, which can untap your commander. Green Warden of Marasa is a double Eternal Witness, so good when you have so many creatures going to your graveyard. An Uvenwald Hydra can end up getting you those critical lands you need. Okay, other really important 6-drops. I have to mention the value of doubling mana in decks that untap. A card like Regal Behemoth is crazy. This card is so good, by the way. Underplayed. Go buy Regal Behemoth. Okay. So imagine this. You have this 6-drop that comes down. Suddenly, all your mana is doubled. And guess what? Oftentimes, the turn this comes into play, you haven't even tapped any mana yet. You've just potted into it. Then suddenly, you have a bajillion mana available to you. And what is your deck filled with? Untappers. Kior's Follower, Vizier of Tumbling Sands, Fate Stitcher, Argothian Elder, Krosan Restorer. All of these untap. And so suddenly, you have a influx of massive amounts of mana. And we've been talking so much about potting into this and betting your creature around and stuff like that. You can still cast stuff from your hand. And so this turn you just play a bunch of stuff and then suddenly your opponents have no way to overcome the card advantage. And by the way, Regal Behemoth, at the end of the turn, because you're the Monarch, draws you a card. Yes. We're running out of converted mana cost, guys, but we gotta talk about 7. At 7, we have Palancron. This is such a broken card. It's so good. And remember, it has this untap effect, which can ramp you a ton of mana. It also synergizes with those lands I can't stop mentioning. But also, remember that 6-drop that I talked about, the Woodland Bellower that doubles your mana? When you have double mana, Palancron goes infinite. Yeah, mana doublers end up being really, really strong in this. We also talked about a Peregrine Drake in this deck too. Man, these mana doublers. But you can't just pot away your Bellower into Palancron, because then your mana doubler goes away. So you might need to make a copy of it, use that Doppelganger, a Phantasmal Image, something like that. In fact, Phantasmal Image goes infinite with Palancron too. What is going on in this deck? How many combos have I accidentally included? Let's just throw in a Deadeye Navigator, which combos with Palancron and your Peregrine Drake and all this stuff too. It's fine. It's fine, guys. It's not like this is a super robust deck full of tutoring and toolboxing and all this other stuff. You're going to be the one that has to make all the cuts. All right, let's keep going to the rest of the 7-drops and finish out this deck tech. Let's just pot our 6-drops into ways we can smash our opponents. Avenger of Zendikar puts a bunch of plants onto the battlefield. Hornet Queen puts a bunch of little flying insects onto the battlefield. And when I go wide with a bunch of tokens, what do I want to do? Well, actually, I want to pod them away into 1-drops and start all over again. But what a lot of people want to do is pod up into our 8-drop. And the most obvious of 8-drops has to be Craterhoof Behemoth. It just ends games, especially when we combine it with token creators like that Avenger of Zendikar, like that Hornet Queen. But sometimes the Behemoth is all you need. Let's run through an interaction with your commander and, I don't know, this totally underpowered card called Protean Hulk. It's a 7-drop, and it can go fetch up creatures with converted mana cost 6 or less and put them straight on the battlefield. Seems pretty powerful, especially when you're potting it away. So I'll tap my commander, and when Protean Hulk dies, I'm going to go fetch up 2 creatures with added converted mana cost of 6. 4 CMC for this Bramble Sovereign, love it, and this Renegade Doppelganger, which I've also been a super big fan of. Next, you're going to resolve your Prime Speaker Vannifar's activated ability and get Craterhoof Behemoth. Craterhoof Behemoth is going to enter the battlefield and at minimum give everything +4/+4. I'm going to have the Doppelganger become a copy of the Craterhoof Behemoth. Notice it does not have an enter the battlefield trigger, but it is a hasty 5/5 big boy, so I'm gonna do that. Then I'm going to have Bramble Sovereign, pay 2 mana and copy Craterhoof Behemoth. This one will give us a trigger. Then everything's going to get +5/+5, and suddenly I'm attacking my opponent with 3 Craterhoof Behemoths out of nowhere. That is 38 trampling damage minimum. What happens if we have an untapped elf? A smash! What happens if there's a Dryad Arbor on the battlefield, or a Thragtusk token? That means that we're smashing for even more damage. Of course, there's another 8-drop that's pretty powerful too, and that's gotta be Woodfall Primus. Woodfall Primus destroys any non-creature permanent, and it has that persist mechanic. That's pretty good if we have that Malira out, but also we can pot it away into a 9-drop. The problem is that our 9-drops are a little bit skimpy. There aren't very many good ones. You can do a search online, but the only 2 that I really found that were worthwhile is Nullstone Gargoyle, very fun for shutting your opponents out, and Void Winnower, also fun for shutting your opponents out of the game. But for the most part, hopefully when you get to 8 CMC, you've won the game. You valued them out. You don't need a 9-drop, or a 10-drop, or an 11-drop. But I mean, if you want to, you can go ahead and keep on going up the chain. This commander is so fun because it's so versatile. I talked about way too many cards for you to fit into a deck. If you want to build a deck like Isan and get to the fastest combo possible, go for it. If you want to come up with a janky combo that Pathbreaker Ibexes people for a bajillion, that's fun too. You can make this into a toolbox deck that takes advantage of Enter the Battlefield effects. You can lean even heavier into the tapping and untapping synergies that can be found in this deck. You don't even have to stop at 8 mana. You can go all the way up into 9, 10, 11, 12 mana creatures, making this a huge stompy deck. The choice is yours. This is just a jumping off point so you can start brewing your best deck. If you want to see the deck that I built, go ahead and click on the link in the description. That'll take you to tcgplayer.com. They sponsor the entire Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. And as always, my patrons are huge sponsors of me. Thank you so much, patrons. I couldn't do this kind of stuff without you. And thank you to the viewer. You stuck with it. This video is now over 30 minutes long. I tried to speak quickly. I tried to be concise. I just couldn't do it. Let me know if you stuck around to the very end, and make sure that you're subscribed to my channel so that you can see all of the brand new Ravnica Allegiance commanders that I'm going to be building with. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.